Hi guys, I'm Judy Elmore and I'm a freelance editor with Black Wolf Editorial Services. In our previous video of the What Next webinar series, we were talking about critique partners and beta readers, where you might find them, how you might find them, what they're useful for, what their job is, that sort of thing. Well, today we're going to extend on that topic and we're going to talk about how to handle feedback. It is one aspect of the writing cycle that all writers who are working towards publication will need to eventually come to terms with: the feedback. Let's face it, we are very special people and we want to hear certain things about our manuscripts. We want to hear that the story is the best that they've ever read, or we want to hear that we should be publishing this tomorrow. We love it when people say, well, maybe we don't, but when somebody says, why isn't this already published? That's what we want to hear. We want to hear this thing. It's ego boosting. Someone at the big five will pay you big bucks for this. Maybe they won't, but we would love to hear that. But the feedback that we really need to hear is things like, while I liked it, I felt it needed a little more of, or, there are some inconsistencies here. Have you looked at this, this, and this? Or, hey, what does this mean? I don't understand it. Could you explain it a bit more? Hey, it would have been nice to have a little bit of foreshadowing here. This came out of the blue and I had no idea it was coming. Somebody just needs to turn around and ask you, when did the helicopter land? Because your characters just went splat on the concrete. I kid you not, guys. I've actually read this, and it was Michael Crichton's book, Prey. The feedback we should never hear, but unfortunately I have heard some of it. This is just absolute rubbish. That sort of information coming from us is different in the sense of, we're saying it about our own writing, but we should never hear it from anybody else. What is this? Beep! Yeah, no. We don't need that. It's not productive. Or, you're insane if you think anybody would read this. Not helpful. And you're an evil person for writing such a story. Yeah, again, not helpful. Or, you need to be executed and arrested because of the scenes you write. The thought police need to come and get you. I've actually had a writing buddy that has actually had this sort of feedback. Not helpful, guys. So not helpful. And my personal favorite, one that I have actually received myself: magic doesn't exist, so therefore you need to remove all magic from your high fantasy novel. Yeah, dude, magic in fantasy. That is normally a prerequisite. But okay, not helpful. Regardless, it is still feedback. All feedback is useful. Even the outright mean. It all has value. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how to find that value in the feedback. Sometimes the feedback is there to help us see our own worth. Something that we can pin on that notice board and motivate us to carry on and keep writing. Sometimes that feedback is there to push us to work harder. It's that, make us hone our crafts, become better writers. And some feedback is there to fuel the watch me feeling. The ones that turn around that are outright mean in some respects, those are the ones where you're just going to go, I'm going to get there. I don't care what you say. Bleep you. We will. That is useful feedback because it helps with that writing feeling. And sometimes the mean feedback is actually the feedback we need the most. And I will come back to this because I can almost guarantee there's somebody out there going, no, we don't need mean feedback. Actually, sometimes we do. All right, so the steps, generic steps for handling feedback. Well, first thing you're going to do is you're going to read through that feedback and then you're going to put it into a drawer. You are not going to edit your manuscript right away because you need to deal with your emotions first. When your emotions are under control, then you're going to go back and you're going to reread those comments and you're going to work out what is worth looking at and what's not. You need to assess their worth. You deal with the issues that you agree with first. And that, it might be something simple as, your punctuation or grammar might be a bit off, or they see something that you're going, actually, yeah, no, you're right. you deal with that stuff first. Then, when you're looking at the feedback that you don't agree with, what you're doing is you're going to be looking at what is the person highlighting? What is the issue that they've identified? You may actually see that there is actually an issue that you need to deal with, but you just don't agree with how they've suggested that you deal with it. And that is what's important as a writer, to be able to take that particular step. So let's talk about the useless feedback. Useless feedback comes in 3 different varieties. You have the ego boosting, where the words are things that you can turn into inspiration. They're the things that you pin up on the wall and you go, hey, this person said this about my writing, and it just gives you that little bit of an ego boost. Then you have the watch me, the words that make you so angry that you just want to prove people wrong. And then you have the ones where you're going, did you actually read my story? They're the words that make no sense and have zero relevance to your writing. For example, remove all magic from your fantasy novel because magic is not real. Dude, it's fantasy. Fantasy has magic. Where is the relevance in this feedback? Comments like, you should publish this tomorrow, they're great to hear, but they give you nothing to work with. And that's really what we're after, is we're after stuff that we can work with. Let's talk about the emotional response feedback. Okay, this is an interesting beast because some feedback is filled with so much aggression from the reader, but you have elicited a response, an emotional response. You've done your job as a writer. This is good feedback to have. Even if that aggression is so negative, it's still good feedback. I'll give you an example from my own experiences. I had a beta reader and she sent me an email and said that she had stayed up until 3:30 in the morning to read my manuscript, which is indicative of how engrossed she was into the story to start with. But she was extremely angry with how I had ended the manuscript. I killed off the love interest and she was expecting it to be a romance. And romances, the love interest does not die. Sorry, hey, that's the way it works. She then spent 2 full days trying to convince me on how to rework my manuscript so I could save the character that I had killed, the one that she loved so much. My conclusion? The ending had to stay the way it was, because if she wasn't so emotionally invested, she wouldn't have cared. It means I hit the mark. I had achieved what I wanted to achieve. I achieved that emotional engagement in the manuscript. Then you have the unintentionally mean feedback, and this is actually the hardest feedback to hear. This feedback on the surface tears your soul apart, but it was given with good intentions. This is where perception comes into play, because writers are emotionally invested in our work. It is the best feedback to get because it is stuff that is really hard to hear. It tends to target things that we are incredibly attached to, but they just aren't working. Just because it's hard to hear often means it's the stuff we need to hear. The way you deal with this, and any feedback, including the outright, oh my God, that was disgusting and so mean and that was really cruel, you get a friend to read it. You send that feedback to somebody else, a trusted friend, and you get them to read it through, and you get them to find that one little nugget of useful information, something that you can work on. After you have gained some emotional distance from it, then you have to go back and look at the feedback yourself. Is there anything else that you can work on that needs to be looked at? The feedback that I would provide you, okay, and I would hope that this would be the feedback that you would get from any editor, not just myself. I employ what we call the feedback sandwich. So something positive with something that needs to be worked on and something positive. I employ what I call a mentoring style. So I ensure that my clients understand what my suggestions mean, taking the time to explain the mechanisms behind them. I don't dump technobabble on people. There's nothing worse than getting a report from an editor that is filled with these words that you're going, what does that even mean? No, I take the time to make sure people understand what it is I'm saying. Occasionally, I will provide suggested reworks on particular sections, just to give you an example of what I mean, because sometimes that's how people work. That's how some people learn. Some of my clients have learned like that, where I might go through and say show versus tell, and they've got no concept of what it means. But by going through and providing an example within their own writing and how it could potentially work, suddenly they understand. I am blunt and I am honest. If I don't like something, I will tell you I don't like it, but I will also tell you why. Sometimes that's the most important information that you can have, why something is not working. You will also get my reader reactions. If there's something that made me cry or laugh, I'll tell you, because emotional responses are great feedback to know. That's stuff that you need to understand about how your characters are working. Are you getting the emotional engagement of your reader? For those whom I've worked with before, I will hold you accountable if I think your writing in the passage that I'm reading is not quite up to your usual standard. And when I can, I will provide you with industry insight. I can't always, because I'm not familiar with certain genres, but I do still work in those genres. I'll have a better feel for the thriller and the fantasy and the science fiction, but I do sometimes occasionally work with women's fiction and the odd occasional romance, depending on the style of romance. At the end of the day, it is your story. You do not need to act on all of the feedback that you will get. Some feedback can be conflicting, especially coming from multiple sources. Some people will love sections that other people hated. And you look at it and you're going, now what do I do? Sometimes the best solution is to do nothing. However, if multiple people are highlighting an issue with the same section, then you have a problem and you need to look at it. How you deal with that problem is up to you. Everybody's going to have their own ideas, but you need to take what's going to work for you and your story. In our next episode, we're going to talk about providing feedback. We're going to talk about how you provide suggestions about things that are not working. And we're also going to talk about when you don't like something, what do you do? That video should be available in the next couple of days. Meanwhile, if you have any questions about this or any of the other topics that we have discussed, then feel free to reach out. You can contact me on Twitter, and that's at blackwolf_ed, or you can find me on Facebook, and that's Black Wolf Editorial, or you can find me on my website, and that's blackwolfeditorial.com. Alternatively, if you are interested in my personal projects, you can find me on Twitter, and that's at Judy L. Moore, or you can find me on my website, and that's judylmoore.com. Meanwhile, I look forward to helping you take your writing to the next level.